Alrighty, Benny Kiko here. Today, I decided to modify my Ducky Shine 1.2 Mini from sounding pretty bad and rattly to a much better keyboard for only $20. I've had my Ducky Shine for about a year now, and it's had problems twice. The first time it was double typing quite frequently, so I sent it back to get fixed by the company I bought it from, and after they returned it, a couple months later it started double typing again, and I decided to retire the keyboard. So since it's no longer in use, I decided to do some cheap modifications to it, and to give you guys an idea of what it sounds like, here's a sound test. Mostly all of the keys have some type of rattle and a plasticky sound, and if you listen closely and turn it up and go back, you can hear a pinging sound of the springs pinging in the board. So I'm going to do a couple things to try and get rid of that. The first thing that I bought was a cork liner from Home Depot for about $10. This should help reduce the sound in the case. The second is a Band-Aid. I bought a pack of like 20 of them from Target for like $5. And the last thing that I'm going to use is some super lube that I bought off Amazon for around $3 to $4. So that's how I got the price point of 20. The tools that I'm going to be using is my Fix-It case to unscrew, my Ducky Shine keycap puller to take off the keycaps, my X-Acto knife to cut the cork accordingly, a pen to mark where I need to cut, and some type of gift card / credit card to get inside the Ducky Shine case. So the first step, I of course had to take off all the keycaps to get underneath the hood. After the switches are off, what you're going to do is pull off the top casing. So first you're going to pull the left side and it's going to unclick. Don't go too hard, don't go too soft, it can chip. After that, it'll be able to open upwards. Once you can see the little opening and the left side isn't on, just slide the card that you have inside of the Ducky Shine's case and it'll slowly begin to pop up on these little prongs. Be careful because it may chip, and you have to do this to the top and the bottom. It might take a little wiggling back and forth as well. After that, 3 sides should be clear, and then you can just pull off the right side. It's a little harder because you could see there's a little paneling that's inside of the board. Just make sure you pull up and then to the right, and it should pop off just fine. The next step in the process is going to do a variant of the Band-Aid mod on the stabilizers. This will reduce movement within the stabilizer and reduce clackiness as well. All you have to do is find the little tab inside of the stabilizer, push it, and then pull up on the whole stabilizer itself, and it should pop up on one side. Now, usually people will remove the entire switches so they can take out the stabilizer, which is ideal, but since this is a budget modification and the Ducky Shine's switches are soldered in, that not many people have access to desoldering tools. So this is a cheap, easier way that you can get in without having to desolder. However, it will not give the same quality results as taking off the switch and getting in there much more up close. So what you're going to do is then take your Band-Aid. Right here I have a BB-8 one, and it does not have to be BB-8, it can be R2D2 too. And you're going to slice it into thin pieces that will fit underneath the switch and hopefully not overhang too much. What I did here was I carefully placed it under, and then I grabbed a screwdriver to just pat it down to make sure it was sticking. It got a little folded, but once I pushed the stabilizer down, it evened itself out, and you can see it reduced the wiggle a little bit, and it's a little more quiet as well. Same goes for the other stabilizers. I found what would work best is cut little squares and stick them underneath and then push the stabilizer down on top. I only did it for 3 of the 5 switches, and the reason why is because the other 2 were not too wiggly, and I felt that it wouldn't have had as big of an impact if I did those as well. So if you see from the top down shot, only the 2 shifts are done and the spacebar. Alright, next there are going to be 5 screws on the Ducky Shine. You're just going to have to unscrew each of them. Pretty standard and simple. It goes well with my little screwdriver set that I have. And then after that, you're just going to be able to pull up the entire PCB. Alright, so the next step in the process is going to be putting the insulator inside the case. This will create a little more dampening sound and hopefully get rid of the pinging, at least somewhat. You're going to place the cork in 2 separate areas. The first is going to be this little square up top where I'm pointing, and the second is going to be in the entire thing. I decided to use cork because honestly I've never seen anyone use it before, and I know it's a good insulator, so I thought it would be a cool experiment to try. The only thing is you have to wipe off the cork numerous times because it does have a little bit of crumbs to it when you first buy it, but after a couple rubs it should be fine. So here you can see I'm labeling where I need to cut, go ahead and make the cuts. And what's nice about this from Home Depot is it has glue already attached, so all you have to do is peel it off and stick it in. And like I said before, it's a little more deep up top, so I put 2 layers right there to make it even with the rest of the board. After the 2 strips, I was able to cut out a piece for the entire case, and I labeled where each of the screws were going to go in, and you just have to feel for it and put a little circle. And I went around and used my X-Acto knife to cut little squares. I made sure I put it on top of the gift card that I had because I didn't want to scratch my desk. And then after that, simple enough, you just have to place it inside and line up all the holes, and I was surprised that I did it on my first try. Each hole fit perfectly, so not bad. Now, one thing that I didn't show on video is there were a couple problems when I tried to put the PCB back in. The first thing was the cork on top where the standoffs were was a little too tight for comfort, so I decided to cut them off, as you can see here. And then also there is a switch on the back that allows you to change profiles or something with the Ducky Shine. If you look here, there's a little hole that I had to cut out, and if you see on the back of the PCB, there is the little switches that need to be placed inside of there. So just make sure you cut those out or else it won't fit in. I tried, trust me. And just like that, the board fits in pretty nicely. The next step is going to be lubing the switches. Now, usually when lubing switches, you want to go in and get inside the switch, take it apart, and paint on the lube in a very careful manner. Since this is a budget version and the Ducky Shine has to be desoldered, I'm just going to put it in a little bit of a different way. This is a viable way to lube, but it doesn't provide the best results, and you may over lube or under lube, and it's a little harder to get the lube where it needs to be. And it can get a little messier as well. The tools that I'm going to be using are toothpicks in order to put the lube inside of the switch, Q-tips to clean up the lube that gets spread around, the lube itself, and then some type of pokey thing that you can hold the switch down with a thin tip so you don't get lube on your fingers. So the process that I did was I grabbed the lube and a toothpick, and I put the lube on the toothpick to sit there as a little bubble, mainly because the lubricant nozzle didn't fit inside of the switch and would just create a mess. Then I almost used my finger there, but I didn't. And then I grabbed my little switch pusher, pushed it down, and then I'm going to insert the lube on the left and the right side. This is going to lubricate the stems. This will hopefully allow for less of the clacking noise and rattling noise that you're hearing when you normally type with the Ducky Shine. So after doing that on both the left and the right side, I went ahead and grabbed the Q-tip and just cleaned it up a little bit. It wasn't perfect, but I'm gonna go back and do it one more time at the end of lubing all the switches. And I pushed it down a couple times, and you can actually hear the difference right away after the first lubing. So I was actually pretty impressed with that. Now there's a couple things I want to mention about the lubing process. It was a little more difficult since this way is a bit unconventional. The main problem that I was running into was touching the lube onto the switch too early before it was in the casing, and so that led to problems most likely of over lubing or under lubing, as I couldn't properly get it inside. You can see here I ended up speeding up the process a little bit, where I put both of the lube and the switch pusher in my left hand and then the toothpick in my right hand and would hold it down and put it on the inside. This ended up speeding up the process, but I did get a little impatient and it did get a little messy here and there. You'll see me cleaning up with Q-tips. Since this isn't a custom high-grade board, I didn't feel too bad about the imperfection of the lubing, as it mainly got the job done, and usually keyboards like this aren't meant to be modified. Eventually, when I build my own keyboard, I'll make sure I lube all of these switches extremely properly, take them apart, grab the paint brushes, and lube it much more carefully than this. Since this is a budget lubing process, it definitely suffices for the amount of money that you spend and for the amount of work that you're going to put in. After lubing it all, I went through with a paper towel and cleaned it all up, and then I grabbed a few Q-tips and fixed it up anywhere else I needed to. I also went through and lubed the blue stabilizers, but I was careful because I didn't want any of the lube to get on the PCB itself. After the cleanup and the lubing of the stabilizers, this step is complete. Lubing is done. Next, all I had to do was stick back on the top casing. Pretty self-explanatory, it just clips in. Then I had to throw back on the keycaps, and one thing that I was scared of was the excess lube that I got everywhere that I wasn't able to clean up would make the keycaps slip off, but it honestly wasn't too bad at all. Now with all the keys in, it's time to get typing. The setup is going to be exactly the same on my mouse mat, and one thing I did was throw in some unmodded version of the keyboard compared with the modded version. So enjoy. My final thoughts on the board is I think it came out not half bad. Now, the modifier keys like the backspace and the shifts and the spacebar, they sounded alright. They definitely sounded a little better, a little less rattly, but nothing too crazy that I was in awe about. But the alpha keys, I thought that they were much better. They sounded a lot more crisp and they had a deeper sound to them compared to the rattling sound they had earlier, which was a little more high pitched. I think the cork and the lubing really helped with that. When I went in really close, I was still able to hear a little pinging, but it was definitely reduced from the unmodded version, and I don't even think the microphone was able to pick it up, which is pretty good. As for the feel, since the lubing process was a little more unconventional and didn't have the precision of a normal lubing process, some of the keys are a little uneven. Some are easier to press, some are a little harder to press. Some typing feel is a little different. Nothing is too drastic, but you can tell it's there if you really pay attention to it. Another thing is, since I was using Cherry MX Browns in this board, a little bit of the tactility is reduced. So that's one thing to keep in mind, especially with the ones that were overlubed. Some keys had their tactility reduced by quite a bit. But for me, I always felt the Browns were a little heavier to press, so this makes it a little bit easier. All in all, for only $20 and the ease in lubing this keyboard and doing these mods, it only took me about maybe 2 to 3 hours. I would definitely say it's worth it if you want a better sounding keyboard. The feel isn't too drastic, but the sound is much nicer, and I definitely prefer it with the lube. I've used the keyboard for about 2 or 3 days now, and I haven't noticed any problem with the overlubing, as in causing problems with the keyboard. But if there happens to be any problems, I'll let you guys know in the future. All in all, for my first board customization process with the lubing and the Band-Aid mod, I had a great time. I pretty much just put on some music and hung out for like 2 to 3 hours, and it was a great time. It was also really satisfying for the end product. If you have $20 to spare, I would suggest doing this, as the result is something that I think is worth it. But aside from that, that's going to wrap up the modding of the Ducky Shine. All of the links for the tools that I used in this video and the things I used to modify it, such as the band and the cork, will all be down in the description below. If you guys have any questions, please leave them down in the comments. I'll make sure to reply. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks for watching.